Hi.
New demo today
Nice.
on webinar.
Yeah, I'm the village idiot here at the Van Andel Institute.
One up.
So for people who are here and people who are not here, I chucked together some Reveal.js slides with WebR and Quarto to. It wouldn't be live fire if it wasn't a live demo, and it wouldn't be a proper live demo if I had it ready more than 2 minutes ago. So let's see what we can do with WebR. How many people here have actually used this? I apologize, Danielle. I didn't have time to cram Shiny Live into this.
No.
So you'll probably find some stuff in there anyways. So you see on the QR code, it'll take you right to the slides, and then the short URL is just bit.ly/webr_BOF. So the first time I've given a birds of a feather presentation, I haven't the foggiest idea what's involved. So hopefully this just means that all of you lovely birds are of a feather with me in terms of wanting to break stuff.
Do you want, I don't know if they want to be on the, because you're right there, you're not on the video. I am, but I think you're up there, we'll see the back of your head.
Do they
Want
really
me to
need
move
see
over?
my beautiful self? Hi, everybody. Hello, world. Hi, Mom. Is it better for...
Do you want, I'll move over here.
What's up to you? I mean, I'm happy to sit wherever. Or
You can
stand
sit over here
wherever.
and we'll be on.
The spy cam will catch me if I move over here?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Everybody in the whole room is on, just so you know. We're being seen on the.
Yeah, I heard that. So most of you are familiar with something like this, right? We've got our reveal slide and we've got some R Markdown crammed into it. And then it can obliterate the entire slide if we let it. So that's a bit of a problem. One of the things that I learned since the last time I gave this presentation is that the mouse is going to play hard to get. And that one can use tab sets to get around this. So for example, you can run this code, but at least in my slides, it's not going to necessarily do what we wish. I could just cram the output here, and then that's actually what you get on the other end of this. Now, of course, I could just be a little bit less naughty and create a nice small data set that actually fits into the slide more or less. So, very little. Tab sets tend to do a little bit better. I will admit that I'm still in the process of figuring out how to cram everything onto an appropriately reveal-sized screen. But the nice thing about WebR is that you can run code live in the browser. So, for example, if we wanted to rerun this mixture fit with 3 components, we could do so. And it turns out there's a bug that I stupidly left in my code. In fact, if I really wanted to be a sensible human being, we could smallify this entire thing, like Perl.
So
Have that misfortune?
Perl's my first language.
Okay.
I can't zoom it and I can't scroll down.
Can't scroll down. Well, that is in fact the problem. If you rerun this, give her the error message, but one of the reasons that I chose this particular example is that there are still some sharp edges with this. So if Jenny pointed out, wait a minute, sometimes the default format doesn't work very well, which is absolutely correct. Sometimes it doesn't. Now, one of the things we can do is rerun things live to somewhat address this. And again, I mentioned what if we wanted to try and rerun. Sometimes we can rerun ourselves into an error. It turns out that trying to fit this with 3 components is actually an excellent way to do that. Because this is particularly beautifully split. And I mentioned that sometimes the code is just too big. Now, if you click on this, we have a Quarto document with the full germline analysis from whence some of this code comes, and it'll pop out into a new window. And for a Quarto document, it's nicely formatted. Everything works beautifully. But it wouldn't be much fun for a birds of a feather if everything worked beautifully live. The part of the point of working through this is that there are still sharp edges as you're presenting things. Now, similarly, we can run more substantial code. Again, we split a group of patients into 2 groups based on their expression of a particularly critical gene. And then we fit their overall survival probability to which chunk of the mixture they settle into. Yeah, I believe it would be fair to say that I'm better at certain aspects of analysis than others. So all this being said, one of the things that Alex pointed out earlier is that by default, if you want to use bioconductors in WebR, you need to actually you need to know a magic incantation, which allows you access to the Bioconductor WebR repository. So that magic incantation happens to be documented here. Now, I'm actually kind of thrilled that my push took, but let's say that we leave a bug in our code because we're very smart and somewhat senile. Well, that doesn't work very super goodly because I didn't install the right thing. And this was, in fact, how it was until about 2 minutes ago. Of course, we can also rerun it.
Wait, so is it, every time you run this, is it basically starting from a fresh R session with no packages installed?
No, so there's
Because it said that the install failed, and then it said it couldn't load the geoquery package.
right, because by default in Quarto at least, you're just using the stock RWASM repository. In order for everything to run in the browser, it has to be compiled down to WebAssembly. In order to be compiled down to WebAssembly, that has to be in essentially a clean room where everything is pickled into a virtual file system by scripting, and then all of the R code and everything that can be compiled for the low-level libraries of R is compiled directly into WebAssembly, which is essentially the same as what V8 does within Chrome to make things like Gmail run faster. So the a Chrome tab, for example, has a 4 GB process limit. A 4 GB process limit means you can get away with some pretty alarming tricks in terms of running your code directly in the browser. However, one thing that's been a snag, at least for the Bioconductor project for quite some time, is that by default, nobody was compiling the Bioconductor packages. If you attended Alex Mahmoud's lightning talk, he went through 3 absolutely colossal projects in less than 60 seconds apiece. I mean, Alex is, I don't know, he's just somehow related to Superman, but Alex is the guy who makes sure that all the Bioconductor pages get turned into WebAssembly so that they can actually be bootstrapped into WebR, for example. So in this case, I just wanted to use geoquery, right? I just wanted to tell me, where's the supplementary file for this particular RNA-seq experiment they were using for the carpentries demo. Now, behind the scenes, and I purposely wanted it to install this live so you could see how much bootstrapping takes place. It's possible to auto-load, and in fact, for all of the other demos in this slide deck, WebR and Quarto cooperate to make sure that once the pages load with that enclose the slides, all of the packages that I need are loaded, with the purposeful exception of the one Bioconductor package that I used for a demo here. So all of the raw code for these slides is available on our lab GitHub. I suppose instead of putting a link to the slides that you're already viewing, maybe I should go ahead and put a header there, but you can probably puzzle it out if you look up the Trish Lab organization on GitHub. Now,
is this currently running client side or?
This is running on your browser. This is running on this browser. This isn't my computer. This is a random Windows computer I walked up to.
But it's not running on like some Trish Lab.
There's no server involved.
Oh, wow.
So that's the whole point of WebR. There's no behind the scenes tricks. This is compiled and bootstrapped into the browser and running within your Chrome tab process limit.
And Bioconductor packages just work on that.
Thanks to Alex, not thanks to me, but thanks to the heroic efforts of Alex Mahmoud, we can in fact look up, for example, specific geo samples and their supplementary file locations live in the browser. This is not pre-compiled. In fact, if we change it, go ahead and do that. Just, why would we settle for that one? Let's go ahead and rerun it, shall we? There we go. This is live. Go ahead and rerun it on or your copy of the slide deck if you wish.
What's the directory?
Which directory? Oh, if you just go to bit.ly/varboff.
Like if I want to save a file or like RDS file.
So that is where it gets interesting now, isn't it? Because there's a virtual file system that is sandboxed within your Chrome process, I would personally advise not saving into anything to the Emscripten file system because as you noted, when you unload this in the browser, it's gone forever.
It's all just in the memory of that tab, right?
So that cuts both ways. Right? And personally, if I want something to be properly reproducible, then I'm going to put it into an R markdown and keep all of the artifacts. But this does open up the possibility of, wait a minute, what if we wanted to make it so that people could transfer artifacts back and forth? Let's go back one slide. Now, if you look up here, I'm pulling from the lab repository an RDS file. You can pull the same thing with a CSV file. And in fact, in the previous example, that's precisely what we did. If you think about this, this means that you could also start firing off post and get requests to a web service. This is kind of why I wanted to do a birds of a feather and toss things out there, because some of you are more experienced developers than I am. And it's possible to pass artifacts through a WebSocket in this way. So it is in fact possible that we could massage, build, or otherwise interact with experimental or analytical artifacts and pickle them onto a server. I haven't gotten to the point where I'm willing to spin up an Amazon instance to start recording those onto S3, but it's something that I'm considering writing into an R25 grant. And anybody who wants to work on this, I tried to sell the carpentries on this during my instructor training because I can't stop selling used cars. It's why I'm in the And apparently they had not had enough of academia because I promptly got the forms to here's how we write your letter of support and here's how we can support you on your grant applications. I think that there's a great deal of upside potential for this, but as both of you have pointed out, there's also downside potential if we are not clear to users that it's ephemeral unless we make it otherwise. But for example, those of you, I don't know if Jay is here. Oh, I might be in the other one. This is a tragedy. So JRM Kantrala presented the BioCPI workshop. Jay and Aaron Lunn work together at Genentech. I don't know if any of you have played with Kana. I should probably link to it, but Kana does a full single cell RNA sequencing analysis in the browser using WebAssembly. So you feed it the output of Cell Ranger or FastQs if you really want to break your browser. And it runs through an entire single cell pipeline all the way to gene separation analysis, clustering, contrast between clusters, what have you. And it's an in-house tool for Genentech. And again, one of the nice things about the Bioconductor project is that people like Alex and Aaron are willing to dump the artifacts of their code where anybody can use them. So
does it have like a memory restriction that you can use up to that much memory, or maybe when you're loading a file, your file should not be too big or something like that?
Yeah, so I have managed to crash. I've managed to crash processes multiple times. Lauren is particularly aware of this. But I've also managed to cram things into artifacts that can work on a phone. So if anybody actually wants to pull up these slides on your phone, they've also run there. For me, at least, this speaks to the possibility of, instead of teaching people how to use an HPC or teaching people how to spin up an Amazon AWS instance, some of the analyses we're doing, and you know, I feel like some of these aren't actually trivial. We're writing a paper around this particular one in terms of using mixture models to identify informative biomarkers. And I mean, this isn't completely trivial. If you go and run the code, you'll see that it's fitting a maximum likelihood mixture model. And in fact, we can do the same thing for non-normal distributions. There's some pretty heavy lifting going on behind the scenes, but there's no particular reason why a user needs to know that. If we just want to acquaint people with the downstream of what we're doing, I don't see why somebody should have to spin up HPC or bring up a terminal, for example, just to look something up in Geo. And I think this also speaks a little bit to what Steve was presenting in some of his work, is sometimes finding the data and figuring out what to manipulate is actually much harder than the stock, repetitive, tedious work of making sure that all the packages are installed. We can do that for downstream users up to a point. 4 gigabytes is about what that point is. So I mentioned in my abstract that
So there's so all the packages which are come from the Bioconductor that can be loaded. But what about the GitHub and other repositories?
So I guess that's an argument against accepting GitHub dependencies in Bioconductor. Because right now, if you want a GitHub package to be accessible from WebR, you need to set up your own clean room environment. You can do it. I've done it. I personally don't recommend it. It's roughly as much fun as beating your head against a brick wall until your forehead bleeds. But I mean, it certainly can be done. But to me, at least, this is kind of an argument for CRAN and Bioconductor. So if we pulled up RCPPML, if we pulled up Zach's NMS package and used WebR install, it installed cleanly.
Okay.
That's actually, it's less trouble to do that than to compile it and install it from the command line on my Linux box.
Yeah.
So for me, at least, I'm hopeful that this presents certain aspects of training.
Couldn't you also make a GitHub action that would do that on any R package repo?
That's a good question. This is why I wanted a birds of a feather. I personally have had some issues with GitHub Actions. Right? One of the stumbling blocks for the package development workshop was getting the package down to render via GitHub Actions. And after about 8 hours of not sleeping, I gave up. It's I don't know any other way to put it. Now, why is it that I decided it would be more fun to not show the code than to show the code? This is rather unfortunate. There's work that remains to be done. Some of the HTML widgets that have been created in R, for example, encapsulate some fairly handy techniques that are somewhat obscure. And by somewhat obscure, I mean that my grad student, Lauren, flew to Germany and gave a presentation to a room full of otherwise fairly sophisticated scientists. And the thing they couldn't stop talking about was the graph visualization technique. Now, again, we can wrap that right into slides or the supplement for a paper. And I mean, again, this is why I wanted to throw some ideas out that have been percolating ever since I was a postdoc. I haven't necessarily had time to figure out which ones are worth pursuing. It sounds like some of these, a GitHub action to compile GitHub packages that pass a certain standard might work. I could see that becoming a security issue. I hit that towards the end of these slides. If you really want to be in control of the user experience, you take a compiled archive, a version control the artifacts from the dirt up, and run your own repository. There's ups and downs to this, but those of you who've had projects where some of it was in-house and some of it was public are probably familiar with this. There's plenty of companies that have internal repositories that are maintained. If you really want to be certain about a hardened product that isn't going to break, and you can pickle the exact state of your runnable application that corresponds to what's running on the web, so that everything within the control of the maintainer is in fact going to be static. For me, at least, this speaks to something that makes me more comfortable. Sometimes anybody who's a package maintainer, maybe you depended on the matrix package at some point, or maybe you depended on the single cell experiment that depended on matrix. Every so often, the maintainer will make a change that to update the API, for example, and either you update your downstream dependency packages or it breaks. If you pickle the artifacts, the WebAssembly artifacts, and post them statically, you can guarantee that's not going to happen because it is a single snapshot in time.
Charlotte has a comment online.
Which Charlotte
Charlotte
says.
Swanson, she said, read GitHub packages. Our universe builds WebAssembly binaries for
GitHub And that's for all GitHub packages or for our open side? I mean, I guess you could control, oh, there we go. GitHub actions for our WASM. It looks like I'll have to be making some updates to these slides after the chat. So again, Charlotte is, for those of you, many of you, maybe most of you, if you use Bioconductor, have used her work. Maybe the name doesn't ring a bell, but again, she has poured heroic efforts into the health of the project and to making certain aspects of it, like experimental design, linear models, how these things connect to statistics writ large. Charlotte has put an absurd amount of effort into this. So Charlotte answered in the chat that there is an RWASM GitHub Actions. The phrase GitHub Actions fills me with a sense of dread because it's like a magic trick that blows up your wand. But if it works reliably, then it's amazing. And if it doesn't, then it's very frustrating. So I mentioned that some of these tools enable a level of bootstrapping that speaks to me. These figures are actually, the one on the left is from 10 years ago. And I'm somewhat amazed that it still works because the one on the right, Lauren created what, 10 weeks ago? I wasn't sure that was going to work. and I will say that I do like being able to pick up where I left off, even if that was a decade ago, and have everything just work. And that's not always the case in the R and Bioconductor universe. Martin left for Buffalo, but he might be online, so I probably shouldn't say anything about summarized experiment 0. But suffice to say that API changes can be brittle for both maintainers and users. I mentioned that observable.js is something Mike Bostock wrote, the guy who created D3. Quarto supports it, but I have to say, the way that it works in Quarto, it doesn't support me. So those of you who are expert with observable, I tip my hat to you. But
Is it possible that he put in a special case just for you?
Probably. It's distinctly possible. One other thing, again, this will fire off a link into a separate window. So whether you're online or here, the Tidy Data Tutor is from Sean Cross at the Hutch. And anybody who has taught tidy verbs or pipelines, like this might appeal to you. Are you familiar with this widget?
No.
Okay, I encourage everybody to give it a whirl. It's close enough to magic that it took me a while to interpret it. The Datations package turns out to be the key to Tidy Data Tutor. And what Datations does is if you give it a tidy pipeline, it'll make an animation of what exactly your pipeline is doing. Now, Tidy Data Tutor takes that sort of to the next level by arbitrarily taking the actual data inside the actual cells and rearranging it as you see fit on the fly. I encourage playing with it just to, if nothing else, as a coding exercise, how would you write this thing up? It's, for me at least, I've been trying to figure out how one could provide intuition at a reasonable level about modern data-intensive statistics without demanding that people have multivariate calculus or linear algebra backgrounds. And I've settled on the notion that a random number generator with animations is probably the only way I personally am ever going to get there. It's possible that greater minds than mine own have figured out cleaner ways, but I haven't seen any of them. So, yes, it's an iframe. I really should make the code available both for the dirty tricks and because I should get pull requests from people who know better how to solve some of the problems that I presented. So I mentioned that there's challenges, and the topmost one has actually already been brought up. How do you make sure that you know the provenance of the artifacts that you're bootstrapping into the user's browser? There's an interest group that Jay brought up. Well, why don't we use web GPU so we can use the user's GPU while we're at it? I mean, I guess if the user trusts us and wants us to use their computer to mine Bitcoin, that's cool. But it's always possible that we might want to have more hardening. So if we were going to if we were going to, example, propose that this could help with stats education, then we would like to make sure that there isn't some sort of worm that'll chew up their user's computer or commandeer their email and send out 419 spams to try and connect people with their long lost rich Nigerian prince brother. So the Alex has set up a authority of record for Bioconductor in terms of Bioconductor packages. Our WASM group has set up and maintains every night the top 20,000, 30,000, some multiple of 10,000 packages off of CRAN. Brian, you mentioned that having a GitHub action to crank out an artifact for an arbitrary GitHub R package would also make sense. This is true. I will say that if we want to have any assurances for users that we're not doing something naughty, and we want to have essentially the type of transparency for which this project is known. Does anybody remember the days before BioC Manager? Okay, so at least some of you remember. Do you remember why BioC Lite became BioC Manager?
Because you're sourcing a file from the internet.
Right. Colin Gillespie at Jumping River has pointed out that there's an easy man-in-the-middle attack that can be done, and in fact commandeered DNS to actually prove it. So that was one of the reasons why Martin moved the project to BioC Manager. There has to be all the way down. There has to be visibility to where everything is happening every night. This is also the single source package builder, and most of the build architecture got upgraded around that point. Now that's a grunt. For me, it's still a bit of a grunt. I'm not 100% certain that for one-off projects like these slides that I necessarily want to host my own WASM artifacts. I'm getting there, and I probably will take Charlotte's advice and start cranking out my own WASM artifacts and make me a little bit more parsimonious about how I use space. But it's a grunt, and there needs to be some means of support. As Vince pointed out, every year the feature requests get larger and the funding gets smaller. And even if these things are automated, at some point we got to pay for the storage, we have to pay for egress, we have to pay for a number of things in terms of distributing these artifacts that can get pretty expensive. I wonder if it's possible to avoid some of the larger egress sources in terms of re-downloading VS Genome packages, for example. I don't yet know. I'm excited that there's enough support for WASM for low-level compilation at this point in time, but there's certainly some sticking points about it. If users pull in new data or if they edit the code, well, to me, that's easy. That's their problem. Right? If it blows up the browser when they execute new code, well, a bug. Right? That my responsibility ends where the user's keyboard begins. Performance. R can be a pig, although truthfully, modern computers and web browsers and WebAssembly are so damn fast that if we can put if we can put men on the moon with 64 kilobytes of RAM, and if we can install pretty much all of Bioconductor just to look up the supplementary files for a sample, I don't actually see that as that big of a deal. If you're going to do 1 million simulations and each one of them is going to do 10,000 to Hamiltonian Monte Carlo runs, then yeah, maybe don't do it in the user's browser. But for an awful lot of, this is one of these examples is, this is 30 years worth of children's oncology group trials. It runs in an instant. Right? At some point, we just need to have transparency. At some point, I claim that one key aspect of modern compute-intensive research, analysis, and science is the ability to verify that nobody has made a mistake in their code or made poor assumptions in the design of their experiment. And the ability to live host analytical code to me speaks to that. Kick the tires and test the assumptions.
So I have a quick question.
Yeah.
All these like slides with R running that you have are just like essentially an R text box and then a Go button, and then it just displays whatever plots or whatever else you produce under it.
Yeah. right into this. So this is why I use Quarto with WebBar. It means I don't have to handle the.
So this is like a Quarto document where each header is a slide.
It's a WebSocket call, right? The WebBar, along with the Monaco editor, is opening a WebSocket so they can manipulate the document object model for the web page. But again, that's 20-year-old technology. It's not like this is particularly cutting edge. So I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be possible to shove this into something like React, but I haven't done it. Caching. I mentioned artifacts over and over and over again. At some point, if somebody's going to do a big lift, it would make sense to cache it. It might make sense for users to have the ability to cache things via a WebSocket that isn't purely local, with a properly supported resource. For example, Annotation Hub, making sure that contributions to Annotation Hub are going to get rejected. This is one possibility in terms of just checking formatting. You got 4 gigs of process limit. It turns out you can shove a lot into 4 gigabytes.
Speaking of which, how much, when you load this page, it basically has to download a compiled copy of R, right? How big is that?
Not that big. Again, because it's compiled down to WebAssembly. Did you not? Let's see.
Never actually
Pull up the
big R
profile.
binaries.
I'm gonna say again, this is why I wanted birds of a feather, sort of a conversation for this particular.
Can you show us where the code for this is?
Yes, as it happens. And if I was clever, I would have put it in the. So as it happens. Some of the Quarto documents, if you were to fire them up out of these slides, you'll note that they actually do link directly to the code, but because I was not clever.
Actually, does it have to download an entire copy of all the standard library as well?
This is why I should go ahead and benchmark the size of the artifacts. They're not monstrous.
I'm just thinking, like, what's the minimal amount of stuff you need just to run R?
Well, I will say that when I do a profiler, I'll go ahead and update the slides to link to the slides. The Quarto document itself is right here. I do my best not to hide anything for anybody ever. I'll go ahead and link to it within the slides at the bottom of them. Actually, which time do we have? I'm going to go do that live too. All right. Some of this is a bag of tricks. I will also update the slides to reflect what the size of the artifacts are. And I guess if I'm going to be complaining about security, I better go ahead and host a bunch of the artifacts to find out what the space and egress footprint would be if I was going to go ahead and host it myself. I will say that we have crammed a lot of stuff into GitHub over the years. So our glorious and generous sponsor, Microsoft, has made some of this available, whether they necessarily know it or not. At some point, though, if we start cramming a ridiculous amount of artifacts into something like this, somebody would probably squawk, but maybe not. Maybe we can just keep right on going. It's probably a rounding error for a $3 trillion company. So
On the subject of security, so that's like, if you're loading like some sort of third-party package that was compiled from a GitHub action.
that's what worries me.
Yeah,
That's why.
I guess like what kind of insecure things can you do within this like sandbox? You can't access the user's files, like real file system, right?
Right. So you are sandboxed away from the user's
You
real
can
file
make
system
web
because
lists.
you're mounting a virtual file system via encrypted. There has to be something that you can do in the browser. There's always a bug somewhere.
Well, yeah. Assuming
Where and what you can do with
if
it.
there's a sandbox escape, then sure, but like, what can you do assuming you can't escape the sandbox? You can make web requests, right? So you can like.
You can open WebSockets.
Yes.
You can download things. You can make get and post requests. If you had appropriate keys, you could probably man in the middle certain attacks.
You send emails.
That's a good question. Almost certainly yes with BaseR. open a socket and start running to an SMTP server. So sure.
Mhm.
Actually, sometimes being a 30-year-old cave person actually does come in handy. But the attack surface is somewhat minimized. But a lot of these are essentially, does this speak to other people the way it speaks to me as somebody who's had to teach intro stats and who occasionally teaches introductory type of material for Bioconductor? Would it be easier, or has everybody in here gotten used to using PuTTY to hop onto an HPC, download everything? Yeah, I don't know where the trade-off is. Suppose I could,
Well, again, these sorts of things that it's just there in the browser are great for the very first experience, I think, with R, where you don't want them to trip over, I gotta install RStudio, I gotta install R, I gotta download these packages, and you just want them, you want to get them excited about it, that these are the cool
It's not a
things.
programmer at all.
Yeah, for someone who's not a programmer at all, but then given the code, then you have, they can start to learn code, they can start to change things in it, but I mean, for me, for teaching, that's what I think that these things are great.
Precisely where I'm going with
Yeah.
this. For things like carpenters, I wonder if we could knock off the training wheels a little bit quicker, or at least.
Well, there's the two, do this to see how great this would be to improve your life. Which what you do.
Show your work for
Or, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
so here's an extremely meta question: is can you like compile RStudio in here and like load up a copy of RStudio that runs in your browser instead of like on an RStudio server?
Not only can you, but this is already done and it's live.
Oh.
So the default for WebArt, just as a unit test, what are you gonna do? There you go. So a full read evaluate print loop is, again, it's not complete RStudio for the obvious reason that the file system doesn't have Pandoc, for example, on it. But there's no particular reason that you can't do this. Again, this is just running in the browser. There's no server. So it's more of an inertia question. I don't know if it's a meta question so much as an inertia question. If you wanted to maintain it, yeah.
Like, is there, so you don't, like from a user perspective, you don't need R to have it installed in
Yeah,
the,
there's no R involved. I mean, this machine doesn't have R installed on it. The whole reason I chose a random machine, this is
just running
all
on-
running in the browser. There's no, the only server is the GitHub Pages server. It doesn't have R installed on it or anything funky installed on it.
So I'm just thinking, I've used in the past for a lesson that I taught. I just had like an RMD file that I just gave people the URL and they could load it into their local RStudio and run it. Download the solution file. So I wonder if I could just, cut out the middleman.
That's almost exactly why I started doing this. At least for me, some things that I wanted to document, but I didn't want to go to the trouble of necessarily writing a full paper. At least people whose paychecks I'm involved in signing, even if I don't actually fund them directly, seem to have gotten to using this. I don't know. Yeah.
You tried installing the index file, the HTML file, but then when you tried opening it in a web browser, it says the OJS runtime does not work. What do you know what this prompt means?
Downloads index file. Oh, that actually is a sandboxing issue. So, in order to avoid cross sites, if you were to take this and install it locally, yeah. So, certain aspects of this aren't going to run exactly the same way locally as they would otherwise. Observable is one of them because of potential for cross-site attacks. If there isn't a signed source for some of the artifacts that need to be bootstrapped, it won't actually load them. So observable is one of the things. Maybe I'll just carve out observable because it's been pissing me off, and I don't actually. It hasn't been very useful to me in this particular endeavor.
Darren, has it been tested on all sorts of different browsers? Any issue with that?
I've run it on Safari on my phone. I'd encourage anybody who wants to run some of this on their phone. Tried it in Firefox, Brave. Can't say I tried it in Edge, but somebody could. Oh wait, did I? Maybe I already did. All right, maybe I just tried it in Edge, so I guess it works in Edge.
You ain't Chrome running out, but you can get into it.
No, this works.
This
with
is
our-
Edge
Works in
right there.
Firefox.
Something like
Next to the
I
Firefox.
literally have no idea what Edge looks like.
Next to Firefox.
The one in Firefox.
Yeah, there we go.
My familiarity with this. Yeah, shall we?
I think Edge runs on Chromium now anyways.
Yeah.
This should work very much, but just let's break it.
But
anyway.
also it's Edge.
Yeah, I think that's embrace and extend, right? Apparently it works on Edge too. It'll take it a moment to actually bootstrap in the packages. I was worried that it wasn't going to. Yeah, well, looks like it runs on Edge too. Yeah, looks like it runs on Edge. This is handy. I mean, I guess I could download Opera or something like that. Or find. I haven't tried it in Links. I will say that. I have not tried this in Links. It's possible it doesn't work properly in Links or Perl. It's possible that it does. Give it a little bit more of a workout in Edge. Looks like looks like everything works. Yep. All right, works in Edge. So any reasonably well-behaved web browser that can render modern JavaScript apparently will run these stunts. Whether that's good or bad is not super duper clear to me. Yeah, so I need to update the slides to have a place for people to throw pull requests if they feel like it. I'll go ahead and do that. Originally, one of the reasons that was motivating me to do this is Zach De Bruyne and I wrote away to CZI a million years ago with the notion to try and democratize use of single cell data and atlas scale data more generally. Once you start getting thousands of samples, you don't necessarily want to recompute the low dimensional landscape every damn time you pull it up. You just want a reference that actually is reasonably complete, and then project your new stuff into there and say, how is it different and however many dimensions. One of my medium-term goals is to show that at least for linear representations, this is possible. Maybe for certain subsets of linearly decodable variational autoencoders. But that's currently beyond what Kana does, I think. Although maybe not. Let's see if Jay is here, then he can shoot me down for that egregious insult. But if it is beyond the capabilities of Kana, it probably won't be for much longer.
All right, we are technically at time.
Oh, okay. So
We can continue the
yeah.
conversation, but
Yeah, I appreciate the give and take and feedback, and I will add I'll just reformat the slides with a direct link to the source code and play around with it. And if you want to send pull requests or open issues or whatever, then you may. I'll do that now, actually. Thanks, everybody.